Hello and welcome to another episode of the Phoenix Wisdom Podcast. I am here today with a little bit of a different episode. Normally, we talk to survivors of suicidal ideation, and today we're not too far off, but we are going to be talking with Debi Roberts, who leads the OLLIE Foundation. And that's all I'm going to say about it. And I will let her tell us more about the OLLIE Foundation and what they do and the amazing work they are doing in the mental health, suicide awareness realm of things. So, Debi, welcome.
Thank you. Hello, hello. Well, you're very quickly going to all pick up that I'm British. So why is a Brit on this podcast? I do run the OLLIE Foundation. It's such a privilege to be the CEO of the OLLIE Foundation, and we are a very small but feisty charity based in the UK. But because a lot of our work is online, in fact, the majority of it is online, we have delegates from all over the world, and we have delegates from across America, North America, and Canada. And it's just a delight to be here to talk more about our work. And I really appreciate you allowing me to break the pattern and come in and chat with you. So if I can, I'll just share that the OLLIE Foundation was set up in 2016 by three parents who'd each lost a son to suicide. They met in a bereavement support group, and when they met, they vowed to do absolutely anything they could to stop another parent going through what they were experiencing and continue to this day to experience. And so today, really, we offer the whole arc from sort of very gentle well-being curriculum with very young children, and then online mindful art classes and Pilates, because we know for sure connection is vital. It's vital to prevent, but also post crisis connection is so important.
Yeah.
And then we have everything all the way through all the stages of education, but then we're also training lots and lots of public health teams, doctors, nurses, practitioners, counsellors, and everyone in between. We create a lot of resources. We make sure they're all free on our website. All the training that we offer, you can bring us in and pay us to come into your company and teach your staff.
Oh,
But
fantastic.
we have a huge menu of training that you can find on our website. The stuff that's on our website and our calendar is our open training, and that means anyone, wherever you are in the world, if as long as the time zones work for you, hop on, come and join us. We've been doing a lot of talks recently. We deliver talks with very well-known people, like, for instance, Gabor Mate, and then people that you would never have heard of, but who have an equally powerful and important message. And people can find those on our YouTube library. Uh,
Wonderful.
so yeah, there's quite a range of stuff we do, from the sort of well-being through to crisis intervention and prevention. We don't do much in the bereavement space, Janet, but we do one thing which is very unique for our, I think, a unique offer. We we're pretty good at filling in the gaps. There's no point in reinventing the wheel, is there? There's so many people doing such fantastic work. But what we noticed was that friends of any age group, but particularly school children who have been bereaved by suicide, there tends to be, at least in the UK, very little available for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I suspect that's true all over.
I think it
Um,
is. Yeah.
yeah, maybe the immediate family, of course, and maybe the immediate close friendship group. But it really has a ripple effect, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So we also offer a really beautiful session called Right to Release. It was created by a wonderful author called Jenny Ford. It's her original work after the loss of her daughter. But it's to help people talk about the emotions that society doesn't allow them to experience or experience publicly.
Yeah.
Um, Shame, guilt, anger, maybe even numbness or genuinely not caring. Everyone thinks I should be upset, but I'm just not, and I can't explain why. I'm just not.
Yeah.
Now, people aren't going to say that. Um, so we give people the space to very privately journal and write about what they don't feel they can say out loud. We never
Beautiful.
see it, we never ask to see it, but we do very gently give them that space and encouragement to finally say those things to themselves.
Hmm.
And then we sort of have a ritual where we dispose of those feelings. Um, and then finally we come together as a group of friends and honor that person that we've lost and think about the things we value about them and take them forward. But listen, this is all about hope. This is all about never needing
Yes,
that kind of response. And certainly we do plenty of work in that area.
it is. And I love the reason that, I brought you on today is just because I feel like there's not enough resources
Mm,
specifically for suicide. Often you'll go online and you'll find support resources for various sort of broad mental health challenges, and they'll have anxiety or depression or, all of the other common things, but there's no dedication to, and it's different. The people who are experiencing suicidal ideation are going through something that is so much bigger and more complicated than anxiety or depression, or it's everything and nothing all at once,
and
right? Because there's
absolutely. And one of the things that makes it complicated is that, and for very good reason, most people have not experienced suicidal ideation. And what we've not experienced, we make assumptions around. We have beliefs because they're based on our observations of how the world works, right? So we assume that if somebody is thinking of ending their life, it must be indicative of mental illness. Even if they've not been diagnosed, there must be something wrong. Um, um, because to want to give away to end one's life just seems, who would do that?
Mhm. Well, and I would say from the stories on my podcast, I'd probably say 90% of the people who experience suicidal ideation, or even those who have attempted it, don't actually want to end their lives. They
Absolutely.
just want to
The pain to
stop
end.
the pain and the situation that they're in and they can't see a way out of.
Absolutely.
And I think that
Yeah.
is a really big disconnect between, what people experience and what people think it is.
Yes. Well, I listen, 100%. We say this in every one of our sessions. The majority, overwhelming majority of people do not want to die. But on that day, in that moment, they've lost the capacity, their resources for dealing with what they're going through have been
Yeah.
maxed. And that's why suicide intervention is so important, because it is so easy to stand metaphorically in the eye of the storm with somebody else,
Hmm.
and lend them your resources. There are countless stories, aren't there, Janet, of someone who maybe was at a bus stop and somebody was chatty and smiled, or maybe in a queue and somebody, I don't know, again, was chatty or smiled, or maybe they found the extra few dollars because you were missing that to pay for some food. And that in of itself was an intervention. You didn't know it, but you just changed the course of that person's life that day.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I 100% agree with you. Overwhelmingly, people don't want to die. They just don't know how to carry on living. And
Hmm.
those are not the same thing. I also believe, and I think I'm so sorry because I don't know the statistics in America, but in the UK, it's around half of people who experience suicidal ideation would never meet the criteria for a mental illness.
Yeah.
And then, Janet, there are the people that I meet who are diagnosed with multiple mental health um, mental illnesses rather. And I listen to their story. And I listen to their story of coming from a just awful abusive home, being removed from that, then being moved into a foster situation, then into an adopted family where they settled and they felt loved and supported, and then the significant carer in that family passes,
Mhm.
and then they're back in the system, and then they're diagnosed with all sorts of things, and I think, well, hang on, the way you're responding, it's called grief, it's called trauma,
Yeah.
it's not all these labels you've been given. And
Mhm.
I've been in genuine situations like that quite recently, actually, with a brother and sister. The brother reached out to us. The sister was again being sectioned because of her. And actually, the little case study I shared just now was pretty much her story. Um, and I fed back to, I don't see you as having personality disorder and all the other things you've been diagnosed with. What I see is someone in deep grief. You've never felt safe. You were
Mm.
moved again and again and again. And do you know what? That brother and sister just stopped. You could literally see the change in the atmosphere. And they just said, no one's ever said that to us. And it
Mm.
just feels right. And it was such a comfort for them to have someone say,
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with you. What's wrong is the situations that you have gone through and been put through.
Mhm.
That's what's wrong.
Yeah.
You're responding quite appropriately to a really inappropriate situation.
Yeah.
But we label it. Now look, of course, it is appropriate in many situations that we have a diagnosis and we have labels and we get the treatment that allows us.
Yeah.
But like everything, it can be a blunt tool, and we can get things wrong.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, leading from that, that's I don't know if that's like two metaphors mixed into one, but we were talking before we started recording about prescription medications and something that your
Yeah.
foundation does
Oh, thank you. Yes,
with
I'd love to tell you about that.
with
So,
that. And yeah, please share more about
okay.
that.
Well, I'll tell you a story if I may.
Of
Um,
course.
So yeah, we do something around prescription safety planning, safer prescribing. But let me tell you how it all started. Let's go back to 2020. I can see myself now. I'm walking around my garden. We're all in lockdown, and I'm walking around a tree in my garden, and the phone rings. Um, and it's a call that I've taken many similar calls of this nature. Someone is ringing the foundation because tragically they are burying their adult or teenage child. And they didn't know about OLLIE. They really don't want to know about OLLIE, but they don't want flowers at the funeral. They would like the money to go to a real boots on the ground grassroots organization. And they've come across us, and they're really ringing for our bank details.
Right.
And the funeral is, coming up in the next couple of weeks, and they want to be able to tell everyone. Anyway, so it was another one of these awful calls. Um, So this was Sam's mum calling me, and Sam had recently taken his life. And she told me, the same thing, just doesn't want flowers, doesn't want money wasted, would like the money to come to us. At the end of the call, she says something which I realise I had heard time and time again at the end of these calls, which was, she said, the tragedy on top of a tragedy is I now know he was trying to get help. And something just went click for me. Well, not so much click. It wasn't like a light bulb moment, but it was a light bulb moment in that I was realizing I've heard this before. There is something here that's going on that is deeper than I'm realizing,
Hmm.
because I did not know at that point how much of the medication you and I and our families and friends and colleagues take every day that lists suicidal ideation as a side effect, and may also list deepening anxiety or depression. So I very quickly came to understand that Sam was a student at university, um, and I'm sure it's exactly the same in the US as it is in Britain. But students are now adults. They're still our babies if they're your
Mhm.
child, but in the eyes of the university and in the eyes of the law, they are now adults.
Yes.
And that means that they are afforded certain rights around what's shared about them. Now, in the UK, again, I'm so sorry because I don't know if this follows over to the US, but in the UK, you just a few short weeks from starting university, you are a school student. And the duty of care within a school system in the UK means if you're late for class or if you have not handed in an assignment, you can bet that your mum or dad will be
Yes.
texted at
Yeah.
work within moments. So no one's getting away with anything.
Mhm.
8 weeks later, you're in an environment where no one knows you. Nobody knows if this is right or wrong for you, if this is how you normally look, if this is how you normally
Right.
behave. You're now trying to adult in the most stressful situation because you're trying to look good and cool and make friends, and that's just really tricky, right?
It is.
Um, you're trying to adult when you probably feel very wobbly,
Mhm.
and you probably, if things start to unravel a bit for you, you probably, because you're at university, so you're a smart cookie, right? You probably do the right thing and you reach out for help.
Mhm.
And that help comes in the shape of an antidepressant.
Mm.
And as was the case with Sam and many other cases that we followed, that young person is dead very shortly after starting that medication. So I wanted to think about this um, uh, based on the assumption that everyone's trying to do the best thing for everyone. A
Yes.
prescriber is not trying to um, uh, cover anything up. They want the best
Yeah.
for their patient. So I was trying to think about the sort of internal conflict for a prescriber. So, prescribe, not prescribe.
Mhm.
What's the need behind the want of prescribing? Presumably, the need is to help support your patient.
Yeah.
And what would the need be not to prescribe an antidepressant? Presumably, to avoid the very worst side effects. If we're thinking about, the general topic of conversation here.
Mhm.
I was also started looking at the UN's rights for the child, and Article 33 says you have the right to be protected from dangerous drugs.
Mhm.
So I wanted to I got curious about, well, what do people know about the medication they're on? Now, I don't know about anyone listening to this today, but I can tell you I've sat with my doctor in the past and he has said categorically, don't read the information in the packet because it will scare you. You won't take it. They have to tell you these things, but please don't worry, this is the right medication for you. I've had that conversation. I've been the receiver of that information. I've also seen doctors, for instance, now, I don't know if this brand name translates, but there's an adult acne medication that a lot of our older teenagers and young adults will be using called, well, we call it Roaccutane in Britain. I don't know if it's marketed under the
It's
same name here.
probably Accutane. That
Accutane, okay.
yeah.
Um, so that is very well known to cause suicidal thoughts. Um, but I've witnessed a prescriber say to their patient, if you don't feel quite yourself over the next few days or weeks, come back to me. Now, I know what they were trying to say.
Mm.
There's absolutely no way that patient knew what they were suggesting.
No.
Just, I've come here for to improve my skin, and you're saying if I don't feel quite myself, let's. So I thought, well, everyone here is trying to do a good job. We don't want to scare people. We want people to feel confident and comfortable to take their medication. And so then I started thinking about other drugs like antibiotics. We're
Mhm.
really clear that you might get an upset tummy. That's a very common side effect. And
Yes.
we tell patients, listen, if you get an upset tummy, you can probably, if it's terrible, come back to me. But, it might just be a couple of days and you can live with that because we got to get on top of this infection.
Mhm.
However, if you get a rash, even if it's mild, come back to me. I need to see that and check to, be sure whether or not that's a reaction to the medication.
Right.
Because if it is a reaction, that means that the next time that you take this particular type of antibiotic, you could have an anaphylactic shock, which could kill you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we're not scared of having that conversation. And it doesn't stop. Well, I think, judging by the millions of people that take antibiotics, yes, there might be one or two that say, all right, well, look, I'm not going to take it. But the vast majority of people are good with that. And they know what to do. They know to go back to their prescriber. Well, that's exactly what we thought is all that's needed. So we created something called a prescription safe plan. This is probably reading back to front, but it says my prescription safe plan. It's a very small document, just a few pages. Anyone listening to this can download it. It's free from our website, www.theolliefoundation.org. It's also available in 16 of the most commonly spoken languages. So hopefully it's certainly in Spanish and English. I'm trying to think of Bengali, Pashto. Oh my gosh, you can see
All the usuals,
all the
French,
usual.
German,
Exactly. Yes. So
Italian. Yeah.
you should be able to find it in a language that is meets your needs. And what it does, if I take you through it, is it really scaffolds the conversation that the prescriber should have had with you. So this can be used by a prescriber. So if you are a prescriber listening to this, this will help you. If you are not, and you're working in human resources or well-being or coaching, or you're in education, or if you're just a mum and dad or whoever you are, if someone, whether it's a friend, a colleague, or a relative, shares with you that they've just started taking, in this case, antidepressants, but
Mm-hmm.
listen, it could be acne medication, ADHD medication,
Mm-hmm.
even Montelukast for asthma. There's clear evidence that young children are, and we had a case in the UK not so long ago where quite a young person took their life,
Oh,
and without any shadow of a doubt, it was because of Montelukast.
oh my
Now,
God.
probably you won't be familiar with this, but it was big news 2 weeks ago in the UK because what we might refer to as a minor royal, not a royal that you would
Yes.
know necessarily, but anyway, somebody who was still there, um, uh, they took their life. And the coroner's report was just released last week. So they ended their life a year ago. There was a lot of discussion, or rather speculation.
Sure.
Anyway, the coroner's report, and coroners, certainly in the UK, do not come to this verdict lightly. It is
No.
not a common thing, but the coroner was very clear. This suicide was a direct result of the antidepressant that this gentleman was on. And his wife, Lady Gabriella, has been in every single newspaper saying to the public, if this can happen to my family, to my husband, you
Right?
better believe it can happen to yours.
Yeah.
Because they are privileged.
Mm-hmm.
They do get to see the best doctors. They
They
that
get the
you
best
think
care that you can possibly get.
you would think,
Yeah.
but unfortunately, it wasn't good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And what a tragedy that is. This was a young guy. So the prescription safe plan guides you through. Let me tell you some of the things it says, if I can, if
Sure.
we have the time. Need my glasses for this bit. And this stays with the patient. This belongs to the patient. So the first thing in here of significance, it says, I understand that all medication has side effects. If I take
Yeah.
a paracetamol, it has a side effect. I just might not be aware of it, but it's
Mm-hmm.
creating a toxic load on my liver. But that pretty much outweighs the throbbing headache that I'm trying to deal with
Right.
right now. So, and while my medication may be very effective, most users do experience some side effects, ranging from really mild and manageable, to more problematic. So
Mhm.
that's the first thing. Just all getting agreement that all medication has a side effect. Um, I understand that initial improvements may not even be noticeable, and I might even experience temporary side effects like nausea or a slight worsening of symptoms at the start of treatment. This is particularly looking at antidepressants now.
Mhm.
But then it goes on to say, I understand that a small number of patients can feel much worse, and some can even experience suicidal thoughts. And it really goes on just to say, although this is really unlikely, I'm aware of it, and if should I feel worse than I feel today, or should I experience suicidal thoughts when I've never experienced suicidal thoughts before?
Yeah.
Good likelihood that it is a side effect of the medication.
Mhm.
And the next page is just a list, but you probably can't see it because of the light. How
Yep.
professional.
It's
But
all
anyway,
white out.
yeah, it's all white out. Sorry, but it's a sort of table where you can complete all the emergency numbers, the in-office numbers, the out-of-office numbers, and you can do that for yourself, or maybe your prescriber will do it to make sure that, if this is Saturday night or Sunday morning, you know exactly who you can speak to.
Mm.
There's
Yes.
there's a little bit more information in here, but it goes on to say, this is your decision, and um, whether you take medication or not, for whatever reason, that's your choice, and you will be supported. But what we can't do anymore, Janet, is bury our head in the sand and
No.
pretend that these things aren't happening. Because let me tell you, I crunched the numbers, and I won't take you through the actual equation and all the mathematics of it,
Thank
but
you.
having done so, and I've done it over several different years, and it is consistent. If 1 in 200, and we know this from the manufacturers themselves, if 1 in 200 are going to struggle with overwhelming thoughts, including suicidal ideation, then again, it's British data, but we're looking at a third every year. A third of all of the registered suicides that we're aware of could be related to their medication.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm really happy to go into the detail of that, should any of your listeners want to pull that apart and really get
Yeah.
underneath that
But,
data.
whether it's UK data, I mean, we're all just people. So, we
Yeah,
have
and
the,
yeah,
the the same bodies and the same brains no matter where we live. So,
yeah, and here's something that is really interesting, and I can speak about in terms of for Americans. Um, in England, and sorry, I should just backtrack a moment. One of the talks that I give is around the history of suicide,
oh,
because people forget that there has been suicide as long as there have been people.
absolutely.
So I give a talk
Which
about
is why it baffles me that we don't talk about it.
yeah. Well, it turns out the Greeks and Romans had a much more relaxed attitude towards suicide.
A much more relaxed attitude about a lot of things.
Yes, this is true. This is true. They weren't relaxed about it if you were a slave or in the army,
True, true.
because then you were a commodity.
Mhm.
And actually, if a slave had the audacity to take their life within 6 months of being purchased, the owner could get a full refund.
Oh, how lovely.
Yeah, yeah. Isn't that nice? Anyway, so I take people very quickly through different times and how people have responded to suicide. Listen,
Mhm.
you move forward to the Middle Ages in Europe, it was far from relaxed. It was utterly awful, the response to suicide. But look, let's get back to today, because 3 out of 4 suicides tend to be male, and 3 out of 4 suicides attempts tend to be carried out by women. And this is actually true across time. It's always been like this. It's not a
Huh.
modern phenomena. It has always been the case. So
Wow.
we could have a whole separate conversation about, are we leaving women and girls out of the conversation? Because if 3 out of 4 attempts are carried out by women, there's something really going on for women that we're not paying attention
Yep.
to.
Yeah.
But in the UK, what we're seeing is, for the first time in our history, a very awful equality, where we're now seeing in areas
Mm.
50-50. We've never seen that ever. In the 60s, we saw the numbers get closer. It was more like 60-40, but that was soon resolved when we removed gas ovens out of kitchens.
Oh my gosh.
But now we are seeing this new phenomena. Now, I am just putting it out there that something we could all get curious about is this. And again, bear with me. From when you and I were little, quite young women, teenagers, we have been talking to doctors and nurses about things that felt very intimate and very private. We have been having examinations that are very intimate and private. And, by the time we're 18, we're like, yeah, whatever, lie down, legs up. And let's not even get started around childbirth. There is no
Yeah.
dignity left, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, the point is that by the age of 25, a woman has control well, let's not get political now, but to some extent she had, she understands how she needs to look after her body, and she's used to having regular examinations and reaching out for medication when she needs to.
Hmm.
Compare that to the number of, a man is not going to have a smear test.
Hmm.
Um, he's not going to go to the doctor because he's having overwhelming problems with period pain,
Yeah.
or excessive bleeding. So our boys turn into men whose first time going to the doctor may be when they're much, much older.
I've never thought of that.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
So,
so true.
yeah. So now I go back to the 3 out of 4 attempts are made by women.
Hmm.
So bear with me on my thinking.
Okay.
Women are used to reaching out for help. Now, in America, as in Ireland and Finland, and as in the UK, and probably lots of other places, I just don't have the research in front of me to tell you where, but double the amount of women than men are using antidepressants. And I think that
Hmm.
makes sense based on what I've said.
Right. Because they
For
go to the doctor and they ask for help.
They go to the doctor, they ask for help, they're used to that, even though it was painful to start with, they're used to having those difficult
Hmm.
conversations. And also, if we think 3 out of 4 attempts are carried out by women, we know women are going through a pretty rough time.
Yeah.
You
Oh,
know,
for sure.
it's not easy, right? So
Yeah.
now we're beginning to see this closing of gap with the suicide in terms of gender and statistics. If you have several million women compared to men on antidepressants, and 1 in 200 antidepressant users may experience suicidal thoughts, and 1 in 200 people who take antidepressants will struggle with
Mhm.
overwhelming thoughts. I think we could get really curious now about chemical suicidal crisis. I think we have to. I think we are doing a disservice to everyone, but
Yeah.
particularly there is, I think, a public health concern for women that we are not talking about, we are not addressing, and it is growing, and we are ignoring one of the main possible. I can't tell you that that's the reason,
Sure.
but I can
It's
say,
a
hey, this
logical conclusion.
yeah, exactly. Let's get curious and let's at least look at it and eliminate it. Maybe it's not a problem, but if we don't check, we'll never know.
Yeah.
So I
Wow.
feel very passionately about this.
Yeah.
Um, this is a tiny little thing, but I spoke about the history of suicide. I think this is a bit of a Trojan horse, in that it gets people to ask questions.
Yeah.
It gets nurses and doctors and psychiatrists and lots of people who weren't challenging things before. Um, let's stop and just think about all those crisis line call handlers and first
Mhm.
responders. Let's imagine a scenario where someone rings a crisis line. They had, let's say they had been physically abused around Easter time. They didn't talk to anyone about it. Perhaps some reason they thought they were in the wrong place, or maybe their skirt was too high, or they'd been drinking, and for whatever reason, they would be victim blamed, right?
Mhm.
But they didn't say anything. They didn't reach out for help. They struggled through with their finals, which they did not do well in. And
Mhm.
now their life is really spiraling out of control now. Um, yesterday, if this wasn't enough, the dog got run over. They've rung a crisis line in talking about they can't go on, they want to end their life. Now, everything that crisis line call handler has heard makes absolute sense why that person wants to end their life today.
Mm-hmm.
However, what they've not heard is that they started adult acne medication 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And what's brought them to a suicidal crisis today, despite how awful all the things they've just shared are, it's actually a chemically induced crisis.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I am one of those crisis line workers,
Ah,
volunteers.
my job
And
was done.
yeah, never a single mention in any of the trainings about medications.
Yeah. And I have spoken to some very big crisis line organizations, and they've said, oh, we do talk about medication. We do it in the safe plan. And I think and
No.
then the conversation ends because they're sure they're doing it. But what they're telling me is, as part of a safe plan, they're looking at medication as a method for ending someone's life. So they're looking at, is there any medication in the house that you should remove or get?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that we do, right?
Yes. Or, have you taken
That's
your
not what I'm
medication?
talking
Are
about.
you not, make sure you're not in
Yeah.
withdrawal because
Yeah.
you've forgotten your pills for 4 days.
Yeah.
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 Exactly. But what I'm saying is, it's
Mm-mm.
a very different pathway that we're going to put a caller on
Yeah.
if we know that they started a medication that has known suicidal ideation as a side effect. It's a very simple thing. All we're saying is, sweetheart, everything you've told me is absolutely just, you know, completely understandable why you feel like this. But you've just shared with me that you started this medication. And did anyone talk to you about the side effects? Because, and then you go on to explain and you say this might have nothing to do with anything, but the first thing we should do is get you back to your healthcare provider
Mm-hmm.
to just have a conversation around
My
this.
God, I love this conversation. Also, I work in a mental health counseling office, so I'm gonna ask all of the therapists in the office if this is part of their training, if this is part of, them talking to their clients when they come in
Yeah.
crisis and, things are really terrible and I've never felt this way before and, all of these things.
I would love to know if it is, because my
Have you started any
experience is
newer
it's not.
medications?
Yeah. And being
Oh,
aware,
I've got goosebumps all over from this conversation. It is, yeah, it's been there the whole time and nobody's talking about it.
hiding in plain sight.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is the whole conversation about suicide itself as well. Like, we don't talk about it and we need to.
Yeah.
And so this is a deeper layer of that
Yeah.
conversation,
We
obviously.
mustn't be afraid. We mustn't be afraid to talk about it. And we mustn't be afraid to talk about, look, medication is great. I'm going to share with you something that is very personal. I live with hidden disabilities. If you could see my desk, you would see this side of my desk is full of pills because I need a lot of medication. And on top of my daily medication, I have to have 2 injections every month. Um, and 1 in 10 people respond very badly to those injections.
Mm.
Sometimes I respond badly. It's why I have to have them in hospital. There's a team around me. Um, I won't bore you anymore with my personal life, but I take these medications because I need to. But I
Right.
also know the risk.
Hmm.
I don't have to take them. But I do, and actually, most of the time, my life is better off for it. Sometimes I
Right.
do respond badly, not always, and thank God it's nearly always short-lived. Um, but I want people to have the same. Obviously, not everyone who needs a medication is going to have a team around them,
Yeah.
um, checking them for an hour. But I think we can do better.
Yes.
I think we can inform patients so that they can think about this. You know, there is, as I say, this is a bit of a Trojan horse because a lot of people want to take medication because I think they believe that that's the job, that's the work.
Mhm.
There will be no more to do once they have the medication. And in some cases, they're right. In
Yeah.
some cases, they're right.
Mhm.
But when we're talking about maybe trauma or things that you've gone through that need to be healed or need to be resolved, maybe there are changes that need to be
Yeah.
made either internally or externally. A pill is not going to do that.
Right. It's
Um,
just going to take that edge off so that you can do the healing work.
and this creates is actually another issue around antidepressants. So, just in case this is useful for anyone listening,
Mhm.
somebody who's deeply depressed, so much so that they're not getting out of bed.
Mhm.
They have to really fight with themselves to even go up to go to the toilet. They're certainly not bothered to get water. You know, they are not looking after themselves.
Mhm.
You then start an antidepressant, and the first positive effect is motivation.
Mhm.
But when we're talking about someone who's deeply depressed, they can't move to kill themselves.
Right. Right.
But now we're giving them a drug, and the first thing it's going to do is elevate their motivation. They can
Mhm.
now get up. That is a very vulnerable time
Yeah.
because we've not improved their mood. We've not necessarily talking therapies haven't kicked in,
Mhm.
or it's early days with the talking therapy because they're being started together.
Yeah.
So now we have a really vulnerable person because now they are moving. Now they can go and carry out what they're thinking about. Now, every prescriber knows this. This isn't news to a doctor, I would hope.
Mhm.
Um, and this is a slightly different thing. It is just part of the drugs, the way the drug works. And that's not what we're talking about here. When I'm talking about safer prescribing,
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
what I'm talking about is genuinely a side effect. And if people haven't heard of the term akathisia, I hadn't either. Listen,
Nope.
none of this
That's
stuff
a
I
new
had
one.
heard of. It was, this is all in Sam's memory. This is all for Sam and all the parents who've lost Sams around the world. Um, I didn't know any of this either. So please, if you haven't, this is what this podcast is all about, right?
Mhm.
Putting information out there. Akathisia is the most excruciatingly horrible side effect of many drugs, but antidepressants definitely is one of them. It is I've not experienced it, so I can only tell you what I've been told, but this incredible physical agitation, but also mental agitation, almost like that wave that comes crashing down where you are absolutely convinced that you have to end your life. It's come to you and it's
Mm.
keeping
Mhm.
you trapped, like a wave can keep you trapped underwater. So, to everyone listening, if you've not heard the term akathisia, please go and look it up because that is one of the awful side effects of many medications. And what I have personally seen is sometimes people are very mentally unwell, they're sectioned, they're in an inpatient facility, they're being given medication, and they are not doing well on that medication.
Mhm.
And they're struggling with akathisia and then they get restrained.
Mm.
Or like the young woman I was speaking to a mother. The young woman was now naked in a small room for apparently her own safety.
Uh-huh.
Um, there are some, there is some really poor practice out there, and it comes
Yes.
from a lack of understanding.
Yeah.
Now, this mum had never heard of the term akathisia. We were just chatting about prescription safe plans, and she started connecting the dots. And she said, well, she was fine. She got married. She was fine. Everything was good. And then she started to get depressed after the wedding. But she also then took antidepressants, and over time she was getting worse. And now this poor woman had been sectioned,
Mhm.
um, and I started to explain what akathisia was, just as actually just more conversation uh,
Hmm.
about how many things we don't know. And the call got very silent because as I described what akathisia feels like, she said, "You've literally just said what my daughter said she's feeling."
Oh my
And
gosh.
and all they do is restrain her.
Oh,
And she said, this is the drug. It's the side effect is making her feel like that. But what is happening for some poor people is that they're not being treated by people who understand this. So they're
yeah.
responding to the behavior,
Hmm.
but the behavior is the result of the medication. But what
Yeah.
are they doing? They're restraining them and upping the dose.
Right.
It's
Oh,
a very scary thing. Listen,
yeah.
there's plenty of amazing work going on out there. Uh,
Yes. Yes.
um, so I don't want to be too gloomy, but hopefully this tiny little document will support people to just
Yeah.
be curious, ask questions,
Hmm.
challenge,
Yeah.
just ask some questions. um and maybe you as an advocate for someone else, maybe
Hmm.
someone's come back to you and say, "Hey, thanks for supporting me. I reached out and just between you and me, I'm on antidepressants now, but this would never have happened if you hadn't helped me." That's a perfect time to say, "Did anyone go through the side effects?"
Hmm.
And even if the person says yes, I promise you they probably didn't do them to the level that they
Yeah.
could have done.
Yeah.
So say, "Look, I heard this podcast, random English woman talking about this. Let's have a look at it. Let's go through it together. See if this is useful."
Yeah.
The worst thing in the world for me is to think that someone has started medication and is now thinking, despite this medication, I'm getting worse. Or knows, as some of the people I speak to, I know the medication is making me worse, but no one will listen to me. That's
Mm.
the most common call I receive.
Ugh. Yeah. Good.
We did a talk about this actually, Janet. We had a woman at the end who stayed on the phone with us for several hours. She had a, a range of mental illnesses. I mean, this was not a well woman, but she was so relieved, but also angry, and also happy, but furious.
Yeah.
Basically, what she said to us was, "You are, I mean, we're not professionals in that, we're not doctors and nurses,
Hmm.
but you are the first professionals that have ever honored my experience. I have been going back time and time to my team and saying, I just don't feel right,"
Hmm.
every time they up the dose.
Ugh.
And you are the first people that have ever said, "No, you're right. You probably don't feel right." Most people feel great, but some people don't, and we have to respect them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, anyway,
Good. Thank you so much for spending the last hour with us and shining a light on this.
thank you for
It's
letting me.
just my mind is blown right now as to, how important this is, and yet again how nobody's talking about it, and we really need to. So I hope that our listeners get something from it, and of course they can learn more through the OLLIE Foundation. Before we go, tell us really quick what OLLIE stands for.
OLLIE is an acronym. It actually stands for One Life Lost is Enough.
Yes,
And that's what we
I love
all
that.
absolutely believe. No one else, no one else. If we can do anything to stop another family going through the pain that our founders have gone through, that's what we do. And that's why we make all of this free. The training is free. Just take whatever you need.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here and doing the work that you do. I
Thank you,
appreciate
Janet.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Remember that you are loved, you are worthy, you are valuable, you are meant for more, and that it really does get better. If you are in crisis, there are numbers that you can call or text to get the help that you need. That information for Canada and the US is in the description below each episode. If you are in immediate crisis, please call 911. We love you, and I hope you'll listen again.